diamonds, all red diamonds. This is diamond 1 actual. Repeat, this is diamond 1 actual. Priority, nothing follows. Position is overrun. Diamond 0 silent. Diamond 1 will attempt regroup at station B. Repeat, attempt regroup at station B. All red diamonds from diamond 1 actual. Good luck. You're on your own now.
Hello, my name's Ian. And this series explores games from the role-playing hobby's history, examining their pros and cons and taking a look at what can be recommended if you wish to give a game a go. With many editions of many games available once more as PDF and print on demand, the series hopes to dispel a little of the confusion spread by so much disparate material appearing under what seems to be very similar banner titles. Today we will be looking at the Twilight 2000 family of role-playing games, published by Game Designers Workshop from 1984, passing through 93 Games Studio briefly in 2008, and currently published in a 4th edition by Free League Publishing. One of the things about growing up in the 1970s and 1980s that young people today are perhaps getting a little taste of with ongoing events at the time of this recording in October 2022 in Eastern Europe was the ever-present looming shadow of nuclear war. Parts of our schooling were given over to it, whether looking at the latest government-issued what-to-do information or exploring the fallout, figuratively and literally, that might form the shape of a post-nuclear apocalypse with books and movies. When the Wind Blows and Z for Zachariah are two that are still lodged in my mind to this day. It was a very real, very frightening, and very fascinating thing. Most of the time, we weren't talking about if, but when, and some form of escalated intercontinental nuclear exchange between superpowers was viewed as almost inevitable. Of course, now we know that that didn't happen, and even when talk of nuclear weapons crops up in the news today, it is mostly referencing tactical devices rather than large-scale city killers. Yes, terrible weapons indeed, but very much more limited in scope from the image of nuclear war that was painted onto our young minds as mutually assured destruction. In this arena stepped a number of games. Primarily for me were the Nuclear War card game from Flying Buffalo, and of course, Twilight 2000 from Game Designers Workshop. The first edition of Twilight 2000, released in November 1984, was written by Frank Chadwick and additional design work provided by John Astel, John Harshman and Lauren Wiseman. The rules held some elements familiar to players of GDW's previous role-playing game, Traveller, but otherwise went in their own direction, primarily to focus on the military and survival focus of the game. The game postulated a timeline cast around a decade into the future, that is, events beginning in 1995, which in 1984 was the future, in which a belligerent USSR invaded both China and Eastern Europe, triggering a Third World War. The Cold War gone hot. Nuclear attacks aimed at eroding the ability of participating nations to support, supply and communicate effectively with their military forces, combined with a general erosion of command and control in the field ground armies down over the course of 5 years of heavy fighting as their governments mirrored their degradation of cohesion. By the time of the game's default starting point, June 2000, the civilized world was more or less at an end. Following a failed final attempt to push into Soviet-held territory, the unit the players initially belonged to finds itself scattered across the Polish countryside, their command and support structure gone. With one final and haunting radio message received from HQ signing off with, "Good luck, you're on your own." This battered band of brothers and sisters must head out into the unknown of a world comprising ex-military turned warlords, fortified and paranoid towns, and irradiated rubble. The default starting point, which comes from the starting scenario provided within the box set, isn't the only possibility, of course. Over its lifespan, many supplements were released for the game, including the US, the UK, Iran, and the Mediterranean. The jewel in the crown of this edition, however, was what became known as the Vistula Epic. This was a series of combined adventures and sourcebooks that built on the tale begun in the core box set. Comprising 21 volumes, this campaign of tales contained many twists and turns and branches. It isn't as simple as the characters moving from one volume to the next, other than within a particular narrative branch. The series takes the player characters through Poland, the US, and a handful of other regions as they battle a variety of foes for their own liberty and survival. Beginning with the free city of Krakow, this is one of the most enjoyable series of adventures ever published, with just the right balance of narrative framework and freedom to let the player characters shape their own story and destiny. Mixed among the region sourcebooks and the adventures were a handful of equipment guides covering vehicles and weapons of the US, USSR and NATO. Rounding out the offering for first edition was Last Battle, a board wargame based on the rules and settings of Twilight 2000 and Twilight Encounters, which expands on the game's encounter system as well as introducing second edition's combat system. In this regard, it acts as a sort of transitionary supplement. Second edition arrived in 1990. The purpose of this edition was actually fourfold. First, the usual reason for a new edition of a game, to overhaul the rules. A shift to using careers and terms for character generation, and taking some of the mathematics out of the game rules. The second edition was recognisably Twilight 2000, but changed. A more drastic overhaul came in 1993 with the release of version 2.2. At that time, GDW decided to bring all of their role-playing games under to use the same foundational rules. The release of Traveller: The New Era brought a general Twilight 2000 set of rules to the venerable science fiction game, but also updated the core task resolution system over to using a 20-sided die. This then necessitated changes to the second edition Twilight rules, and therefore 2.2 was born. If you played both Traveller and Twilight at this time, you were in for something of a treat. For Traveller players, the Twilight 2.2 books presented a huge resource of vehicles and equipment for roughly technology levels 6 to 7. For Twilight players, Traveller volumes such as Fire, Fusion and Steel and the World Tamer's Handbook offered expanded options and creation tools for your games. The intention was to take other GDW role-playing games, such as Dark Conspiracy, in the same direction, but that was, unfortunately, not to be. The third alteration was to update the timeline. As with many near-future speculative fictions, the future had caught up with Twilight 2000, with the original future history of the game not having foreseen the breakup of the USSR, the reunification of Germany, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and so on. While the end result remained the same, World War III breaking out, limited nuclear exchange, and the civilised world as we know it collapsing by the year 2000, a number of key events leading up to this and the overview in which the opening years of the war changed. It also gave the designers the opportunity to build in more Easter eggs for another of GDW's games. Back in 1986, a game called 2300 AD, initially named Traveller 2300, which was eventually changed to avoid confusion with the Traveller game line itself, was released. This game charted mankind's exploits into the stars, following civilization's re-emergence after a devastating final war. The narratives of Twilight 2000 and 2300 AD became cemented. Twilight's World War III was, indeed, the devastating war of 2300 AD's past history. And there we have the fourth. In summary, update rules, eventually tie in with other games using a GDW house system, revamp the timeline to incorporate current affairs, and to make it clear the connections to 2300 AD. Supplements released for version 2 and 2.2 were a mixture of updates to previous first edition resources, alternative future histories such as those presented in the Mercenary 2000, and to a lesser extent, and stranger, in Twilight Nightmares. Bangkok and Eastern Europe got regional sourcebooks, and players were given more character options to explore with Special Operations and the Nautical Aviation Handbook. An adventure, Operation Crouching Dragon, built on the Bangkok supplement's Far East themes. A final second edition release was Rendezvous in Krakow. the Vistula Epic Volume 1. This was a revision and an update of the first edition adventure, The Free City of Krakow, and it was meant to kickstart a reiteration of the Poland branch of the original epic. Unfortunately, GDW closed its doors before further volumes were released, and Twilight 2000 became a dormant property. That is, until 2008, with the release of Twilight 2013 from 93 Game Studio. This edition completely rewrote the background history, kickstarting the road to World War III in 2006, and very much having more focus on the United States. Where Twilight 2000 built on the Cold War and nuclear tensions between the US and the Soviet superpowers, Twilight 2013 builds on the war on terror and strife in the Middle East, the collapse of South America into open warfare, China becoming more aggressive to the point of invading US home territory, and the collapse of the US under pressure from China, Mexico and Canada. A sort of traditional Twilight home is created by postulating a European war between the EU and Russia. The game system is again changed, and again it holds on to some elements of previous rules while building its own structure around them. Beyond the core rules, this third generation received little support for the couple of years it was around, and by 2010, 93 Game Studio was defunct. Twilight 2013 materials are still available, however, with the license reverting back to Far Future Enterprises under the Game Designers Workshop umbrella revamped, as are, in fact, materials from the first and second editions. So this brings us up to 2020 and a Kickstarter project run by Free League Publishing to create a new edition of Twilight 2000 using their Year Zero engine rules. Free League now have several games utilising this system, including franchise games such as Tales in the Loop and the current incarnation of the Alien role-playing game. A review on that coming at some point. This fourth edition makes use of the back history outlined within the second edition, and instead of postulating a future history, it lays down an alternate past. Within this edition, we once again find ourselves in Poland with the infamous You're on Your Own missive and options very similar to those represented by the opening salvos of the Vistula epic of first edition. Sweden, unsurprising given Free League's own location, is presented as another default setting, and further setting maps have since been published. Free League have opened up Twilight 2000 to the masses, promoting a community content program driven through drive-thru RPG. As a result, some very interesting indie supplements for Twilight 4th edition have appeared. So while Free League themselves seem to be slow in direct support, the game is very much a living animal. And beyond that, with GDW having made all of the older editions available combined with simple conversion rules presented in the 4th edition core box set, well, the entirety of the Vistula epic and beyond beckons once more. The general theme of play for all editions of Twilight is that player characters are all survivors of a world war gone very wrong, who must carry on surviving in a world where civilization is falling apart. All of the modern comforts of centralised governments, infrastructure, YouTube, clean running water, all going or already gone. To save time in this video, and because the 4 or 4.2 editions have very different rules, I'll stick to outlining the current 4th edition, and if there's interest, I'll create addendum play section videos for the other editions. Free League's 4th edition presents two methods for character generation: archetypes and life path. The archetypes is the easiest. Using this method, you select one of 9 provided templates which cover both military and civilian options. From there, you build your character by choosing options based on the templates and a set of attribute raises and skill levels, adding scores to attributes and skills as you go. Character generation using archetypes is quick and easy, and you can be up and running in a few minutes using this method. Life paths are more involved. Using this method, you roll for the number of attribute raises you have, these being effectively points to spend to improve your character's core statistics: strength, agility, intelligence and empathy. A six-sided die roll determines your character's childhood background, from which a skill is acquired, and another six-sided die roll selects a speciality from those available from that background generated. For the next step, you select a career, comparing career requirements with your character's attributes and generated life path so far. There are 24 career options, broken down into military, police, crime, intelligence, blue-collar, education, and white-collar groupings. Some careers have requirements that can only be acquired by following a previous career, so will not be immediately available for selection on the first time through the career process. Each career has a list of skills, which you select from to increase the level of skills already possessed or to acquire new skills. Once you have made your choice, you make a skill check against one of the skills that you chose. If successful, you also gain a promotion, increasing your rank, if relevant to the career, and permitting a roll on the career's speciality table. If you roll one that you already have, you get to choose another from the careers list instead. The next step is to age your character and determine whether age and other life events have adversely affected their attributes. Roll a six-sided die to determine age increase. Roll another six-sider and compare that to the number of times that you've been around the career selection process, aka the number of terms. Very traveller terminology there. And if the die roll is lower, then you must reduce an attribute by one step. Next, make another roll against the number of terms, this time with an eight-sider. If this roll is lower, then Third World War has started and you go to a new table for selection of skills and specialities based on your final careers group. If this doesn't happen, then it's back to the career selection phase to build up more experience and age for your character. After determining skills, etc., picked up during the opening phases of the war, the final odds and sods that describe your character are determined, and then it's time to play. Those odds and sods are the same for both archetype and life path methods. These are your hit and stress capacities, describing what it takes to seriously injure you physically and mentally. The morale of your unit, your character's morals, a driving goal for your character termed as their big dream, a buddy selected from the other characters in your group, equipment and background elements such as appearance and the backstory regarding on how you met. It also determines how much exposure your character has had to radiation in this post-nuclear conflict world. So how does this all work? Well, both attributes and skills are ranked by letter, A through to D, with A representing the best ranking, and each skill is associated with an attribute. Each ranking is associated with a die size. D12 for A, D10 for B, D8 for C, and D6 for D. To make a skill roll, you grab the correct die size for your skill and the correct die size for your controlling attribute, and see how many crosshair results that you get. One or more crosshairs, and the skill has succeeded. Two or more crosshairs, something special has happened, if relevant. You can also push a roll, re-rolling any dice that didn't result in a crosshair or an explosion symbol, at a cost of 1 point of health if a physical attribute was revolved, or 1 point of stress if a mental one was involved, per explosion symbol initially rolled. Now, as a general rule of thumb, I'm not a fan of games that use custom dice. However, this is one of the 3 that I could name where they really do work. If you don't roll any crosshairs, the task has failed, and there may be consequences. Rolls can be modified. A bonus to a roll allows you to increase one of the dice used for the check by one size, D6 to D8, D8 to D10, D10 to D12, per plus of the modifier to a maximum roll of 2 12-sided dice. A penalty to a roll reduces the size of one dice used by 1 step, per minus, or if 2 6-sided dice are already being used for the roll, removes one of those dice, to a minimum of 1 6-sider for the check. Specialities have specific effects according to the skill that they belong to, but usually it's around providing a +1 bonus to a check where the speciality is relevant. For example, if you have a machine gun speciality, then you would gain a +1 bonus when firing a machine gun. As already noted, that +1 bonus translates into increasing a die size. Combat is usually played out on a map, in a skirmish board wargame manner. Initiative, to determine action order, is managed by drawing cards, which at the same time determines initiative order and provides a physical indicator of the action order. Mechanisms exist for altering the initiative order during a fight. Actions available are broken up into slow, fast and free. A character can perform one slow and one fast action or two fast actions during their turn. Free actions don't count towards this count. Movement is controlled by hexes on a skirmish map. The nature of the terrain within the hexes is described in its effects to movement, visibility through it, how easy it is to hide within it, how much cover it provides against incoming fire, and how it affects shooting actions. Combat itself uses the skill resolution process, with modifiers applicable for circumstances that affect targeting. Weapons carry a damage rating which is inflicted to the target on a successful task, with each additional crosshair appearing on the dice result providing 3 extra points. Damage is recorded by random hit location. Any armour worn in that location reduces damage. Armour possesses an armour level, which is adjusted by a weapon's armour modifier. The adjusted armour level is then subtracted from the incoming damage. A weapon attack can be entirely blocked by armour if the modified armour level is 2 or more over the base damage of the weapon. In this case, the attack is blocked regardless of any extra damage from additional rolled crosshairs on the dice. Cover is treated in a similar way to armour. If a target is injured by an attack, a 6-sided dice is rolled. If this results in an explosion, equivalent to a 1 on a normal die, then the armour's level is reduced by 1. Representing damage to the armour itself. Damage is not recorded on the hit location, but location is important to determination of armour and any critical injuries that might be picked up. Normal damage is recorded against a character's hit capacity. Characters who take damage equal to or over their hit capacity are incapacitated. They can't do anything else. Criticals are a more dangerous affair. If a hit causes damage to a location equal to or above the weapon's critical threshold, then an injury of some form has been inflicted. This is separate from damage against hit capacity. Criticals are rolled using a 10-sided die on a table specific to the hit location affected. Some criticals are lethal, triggering death saves, stamina checks, to avoid dying. Some criticals result in instant death. Most criticals result in an injury, in turn resulting in penalties to attribute skills and potentially inflicting stress, and a number of other effects reflecting the nature of the injuries inflicted. From a survival game perspective, this is in keeping with theme. Injuries and conditions, starvation, dehydration and so on have an important role to play in getting the feel of the setting right, and the mechanism works well to do just that within this 4th edition. There was a tendency with, particularly 2nd edition, to default back to detail and more of a wargame feel, but the Year Zero system avoids having too much detail in, say, differential weapon statistics in favour of an easy and pertinent injury mechanism. When vehicles get involved in a fight, the game's feel edges more towards a board wargame, but the base mechanics being used are the same. Here, though, we are talking about component damage, which is a relative equivalent to personal injury. It's more or less handled in the same way, except that shots that do not penetrate armour can still cause injury to the vehicle in the form of damage to external components. Overland travel is an aspect of the game that, I feel, is far better done in Free League's 4th edition than any previous edition of Twilight 2000. Previously, overland travel was left to abstracts, movement on sparsely detailed maps with timed requirements for resource handling, water, food, sleep and so on. The maps provided within the scenarios were, for me, not detailed enough to be able to depict a survival game, so much so that I used to use local road maps instead of the ones provided with the games in the scenarios. With 4th edition, The process of moving through the wilds is at once more regimented in terms of feeling like a game, but at the same time detailed enough to give players that sense of dread of exposing themselves to strife as resources dwindle. Overland movement, at least by the book, as using other map sources is still a possibility, is managed on a hex basis using travel maps, 2 of which are provided with the game, for Poland and Sweden, with more available from Free League. Terrain within a hex provides modifiers to actions, movement, foraging, hunting and so on. It slots nicely with the game's time record system, a round of a few seconds, a stretch of a few minutes, and a shift of a few hours, and also unlocks an aspect not present in previous editions, the potential for solo play. The box set includes rules for soloing a Twilight game, including hex crawling across a travel map, determining the nature of NPCs met, what state settlements encountered are in, and so on. While the travel map concept does lack some detail, the way in which it is used within the rules, both for group and solo play, makes game sense and evokes the theme well. All in all, 4th edition lacks much of the finer detail of 1st and 2nd editions, but is nonetheless well put together and very much in keeping with the Twilight 2000 setting. Possibly more so, as players will find themselves less bogged down with rules, meaning that they can get their teeth into worrying more about how their characters are going to survive, and that, whichever direction the players choose to take their characters, is the major element of the game. Twilight 2000 4th edition comes as a well-made box set, complete with a 152-page player's manual, a 112-page referee's manual, a deck of encounter cards, a deck of initiative cards, dice, counters, a handful of character sheets, situational handouts for Poland and Sweden, and a double-sided travel map depicting those regions. All of the components are of good quality construction. The game itself, as discussed in the play section of this video, is simple and would actually form a good starter for someone new to role-playing. The Year Zero game system works nicely with the setting, as it does with Free League's Alien role-playing game, and suits the survivalist perspective of both Twilight and Alien. Much as I love the 1st edition of Twilight, and have a healthy respect for 2nd edition's, or rather 2.2's version, compatibility with Traveller the New Era, for reason explained in my video covering that particular game, 4th edition has found its way to becoming my favourite iteration of Twilight 2000. The Twilight 2000 box set has all you need. If you wish to step further than that, then take a look at the travel maps and supplements produced both by Free League and the community content creators. If you wish to play through older adventures using the new rules, have no fear. The 4th edition set provides easy conversion guidelines. Running the Vistula epic using 4th edition does not present much in the way of pain for a referee translating across from 1st to 4th edition materials. All in all, a good game, a good introduction to the Year Zero system, and a great iteration of the Twilight 2000 setting. There's not much more to say beyond that. And next up, more views over the milieu, and more entries into this long-form game view series. Please let me know in the comments if you would like to see supplements to this particular video, appendices if you will, delving into the play specifics for 1st, 2nd, version 2.2 and or 3rd edition Twilight. Let me know. Until the next time, look after each other and farewell.